What's up, guys? Ben here, bringing you another video today. We are in the midst of Rostermania. I want to kind of open up Rostermania by doing a Q&A video while we wait for a lot more news. So appreciate everybody that responded to my tweet. I'm going to go through about 15 to 20 questions. I'm going to give you guys the primo answers to your burning questions about Rostermania. All right, so let's go through these. We're going to start off with Nick, aka Scuffy is God. I don't know who Scuffy is, but for Cellium, what is his most likely landing spot? Return to phase, Falcons alongside Sib, Pred, Exton, KOI or Koi alongside Thieves and others. One of Cloud9, Surge, or General Mates throw him the bag and build around him. So yeah, I don't know if you guys saw MC tweet out free agent. I mean, this is not a surprise. This is a good way to do an FA tweet. So I don't think that MC would be the type of person to move to Toronto. So I think the KOI thing, I think you kind of remove that. Cloud9, Surge, or General Mates isn't. I would say LAG, if they have the right proposal, might be interesting, but C9 and Surge I would eliminate. So it really leaves three options for me. Option one is to go back, which I think they'll build a really, really solid team and once again be a contender. So that's definitely an option. But if he wants to go somewhere new, I think the Falcons offer will definitely probably be the highest out there. Now, what is the team comp? The one listed here with Sib, Pred, and Exton might be it. It might be another one, but I think the money may be too hard for him to turn down. And then on the LAG side, I think they could actually offer a fairly competitive contract, but that one's more of a squad wipe situation, so he would need to bring some players over. So I think LAG, Falcons, phase 3, but I think realistically it's between phase and Falcons, and I'm not sure what decision he's going to make there. All right, we got the boy, the primo leaker on the timeline, Hope, aka the Ghost of Hope. Can you break down the step-by-step of how player org negotiations play out when signing free agents? How long does it take from talking to signing usually? I feel like a lot of people aren't aware on this. So there's a little bit of a process. I would say the negotiation part happens much faster than you think. It really depends on the number of suitors, the level of team, right? If we're talking about a bottom tier team, there really isn't that much negotiation. But if you're on a top team, there's a more extended conversation about salary compensation, any additional bonuses or clauses. As far as signing, there is actually a date in which players can start signing contracts. D-Real was in my chat and said it's usually at some point in sort of the EWC era. We're now in September, so about a month or so kind of in. So I'm not really sure what the date is now. There's obviously a trigger date in which people can actually execute those contracts. And then they're approved by the league as all contracts need to be. So I would say negotiations are probably shorter than you think as far as like top line numbers, but then you really get into it and then the signing probably takes a couple of weeks. That's why you don't see teams kind of announce instantly, and they're mostly usually done in the fall. All right, we got Toxics with an interesting one here. Should we believe that LET is sticking, and why is Crowder better than you at golf? Well, first off, Chris is not better than me at golf, both digital and in person. Second, on the Thieves front, I think there's a good chance that Thieves stick. I know that Hope, whose tweet we just looked at, tweeted out he believes that Thieves are sticking, and I would say there's probably a greater chance of them sticking than making a change. I do know that I just think the best path forward for them this week is to be kind of patient, see what options are out there. If they get hit up by some of these players, kind of have the thought process and the convo of like, what's our best path forward? Sticking together might be their best path, and that's okay. Making a change and upgrading or switching up the team dynamic might also be a place. So I would wait. I think there's a good chance they stick, but I won't be surprised if they make one or two changes if they think their current comp is not the best path forward. All right, so this is an interesting one from a Just Fire, Dukenny and Drazah's team again. You know what? I can definitely see it, but I wouldn't do it if I were them. The problem with the league now is I think the level of talent, especially at the AR position, has been refreshed heavily in the last about 2 or 3 years. And I think a Kenny Drazah AR duo would be one of the weaker AR duos in the league. And I think even if they have some diabolical like World Star sub duo, I think that would really hold them back. And I think would inevitably result in one of them getting dropped. So I just think, yeah, you had a lot of chemistry back in the day, but I just think them teaming again is not really the wisest decision on their part. But it could happen. You never know. All right, another Drazah question. This one from Kyle. Redo, please. Any chance Drazah and Scrap could squash their beef in team? So if you don't know, Drazah and Scrap have had a fairly long-standing beef. They got really ugly. If you go on Reddit and Twitter, you can search back and see what was said between the two, but it got like beyond the field of play. It was involving like affiliates, aka friends, like girlfriends. It got ugly. I think my kind of view on this is I think players could always or will always be able to squash the beef. Do I think it will happen this year? I just don't know. I don't think Zach had a great enough season that Thieves would like consider dropping Envoy or Dan for him, but like in the future, if an opportunity happened where Scrap and Drazah, like them teaming would be the best option. I could see them sitting down and figuring it out. I just don't think it's going to happen this year. All right, my guy Michael Barish on Twitter, always yapping. Would an org have to wait until HES finalizes to sign a Halo Pro? Is there a way to rescue, or will a handshake agreement have to be made earlier? HES finals is the last week of October. So I actually think it will depend on how their Halo contract with their org is written and what kind of clauses exist as far as exclusivity. So it's kind of hard for me to answer this question because I just don't know that piece. Now, if there was no exclusivity clause or anything holding them back from signing like a pre-contract or a pre-negotiation or a letter of intent, then I think yeah, you could kind of figure out how to stack it. And then probably to make things not as sketchy, you would just sign that, that CDL contract after your HES contract ends. But it's kind of hard to answer this question because I just don't know what those Halo Pro contracts look like with their existing orgs. All right, Gordon comes in here with a fun one. How much of a focus do these teams have on comms when picking up new guys? Specifically thinking about the importance of Hook's comms and Optic and its role in the team's turnaround. I would say they think about it, probably not as much as you think, but it's definitely a consideration that they contemplate as far as like how it shuffles the dynamic of their team and kind of what that player brings on that front. I would say they more focus on skill and roles, but like a good team, a good GM, a good front office, like they're including the communication as part of their eval and player ranking. And yeah, so I think people are thinking about it. Bhagawandi with this one, seems like this is the biggest chance for parity in the CDL given how many talented players will be involved in roster moves. If the best players don't just team up and the right challengers players get opportunities, how many potential teams do you think can win an event in Black Ops 7? This is a good question. I think with the amount of free agents, and if I click over here, you're going to see this sheet that we'll probably be pulling up a bunch that my guy Turtle made that shows the current set of free agents and some of the players that are currently already kind of attached to teams that we don't think are free at the moment. I think there's a chance we probably get 5 or 6 really, really good teams. There may be like a 7th team that's kind of like a real dark horse team, but I think that the talent's going to kind of distribute pretty evenly this roster mania, and it just comes down to whether or not teams make like bad decisions in their team comp to really like chalk their stock. But I think there's a chance to your question, like we're gonna get a lot of parity this year compared to say 2 years ago, right? This year there was a decent amount of parity. The year prior there really wasn't. Vanguard was a year where we had a lot of parity. Maybe we get back to that. Some of that also kind of depends on the title, and it's really hard to kind of speak to that without seeing the title. But I think this roster mania can really shake things up as far as like teams that can win front, and we can definitely get 5 or 6. All right, a lot of phase questions. I kind of took a couple or that I thought were good. So this one from MK, hypothetically, simp / Abizi stick plus 2 new players, or simp / cell stick plus 2 new players, who has a better chance of success? I think for me, if I were phase, I would rather go with the simp and cell option because it gives you kind of some role flexibility on that front. I just think Simp and Tyler, Chris and Tyler have teamed together for a while. And I think it's clear when you watch that sub duo play that I just think breaking them up is better for both careers. I think just a change of scenery for one will really help. Whereas I think with Simp and Cell, MC's got his issues he's got to work on. And obviously Chris, I think, kind of just turned into a little bit of a hill kitten at the end of the year. But I think that sets him up better for success long-term going with that option if I had to pick between one or the other. All right, Casey comes in with this one. Do you see a world where 90% of the changes being made actually make a lot of these teams worse? I only see a select few of teams improving. I would have said the first couple of years in the CDL, not 90%, but there would have been a lot of bad changes. I think for the most part, people have gotten pretty good at making team changes that make sense considering their situation, both from an economic standpoint and what talent is available. So I think you're missing with this one a little bit, to be honest. RJ Simmons, aka Kyle from Chicago, is a Rencor buyout plausible for either Thieves or FaZe? Feels like if one of them come calling, he would jump at the opportunity, especially with half of that team being FA as well. I think it's definitely possible. I do not know what his price is, but I think in the realm of all potential opportunities out there and roster changes you can make, he definitely has a good stock. I definitely think if one of those teams wanted, they would call. I just don't know what his price would be, but I definitely think it is possible. T3N or 10 comes in with this one. Hypothetically, would you like to see Optic / FaZe move their Halo teams to funded challengers teams? They're already on payroll, could be interesting. I talked about this on stream yesterday when I was yapping with Attach and with Riley from Optic and with Octane. I actually really like this move, especially for Optic. Just like if those guys aren't getting solo offers to come into the league or like really top challengers teams, I think like doing an Optic Nation or a FaZe Black or an FC Black, that first, hopefully in the fall or winter, like event this season that should be a Pro-Am, that would be a really good move. I think both from like a teamwork standpoint, but also there's like a really compelling story to make there that you can maybe get a brand or a sponsor really interested in being part of. So I think it's actually a really, really good idea. And I'm curious if them or any of the other orgs that are in Halo really think about it once HCS ends at the end of October. All right, poor brown boy who's got, what's his picture, bro? Is this a Dylan attached with cornrows in the, okay, interesting, okay. What franchise do you think is gonna have the most surprising Rostermania? Well, let's take a look. I think looking at this list, I think Falcons to me is the most interesting because of their resources and how they can really go and move around the spots available on this roster. I would say the most interesting, if you want to pick like a mid-pack team, I think Boston, because I just don't know if they're going to stick or if they're going to make changes. I don't know if they're going to keep Snoopy. Their situation is really, really interesting to me on how they want to navigate that. But also for what it's worth, that can make a pretty compelling story for like virtually everybody on this list because, you know, I'm good at streaming, so. But I think those two in particular are like, you know what I'm saying? Outside of like the obvious ones, like what is FaZe going to do or Thieves, you know, something like that. All right, RJK-Quicks24, team that is going to be the most disappointed in the roster shakeups. I think the team that I think might screw it up is Falcons, especially if they, you know, let's say they go down this route and the two players they pick up are say Sib and Cell. I think then you end up with what I've talked about a bunch as like a mercenary team where I think you're kind of recruiting people over because of the money and it's not really to build a winning culture. And then you're going to get into practice against these teams that have really good chemistry and they're going to struggle. And then there's going to be a lot of pressure from the org when the results don't happen. So Falcons has got that potential. I think, you know, potentially like a Vancouver could not look as good if they don't bring some of those players back. Rocker, I'm just really curious how to navigate it. And I think Carolina, to be honest, with their situation, unless that org is swapping hands, could be a bottom feeder in the league this season. DJ Bennett comes in with, is this finally the year the Friendship League ends? Bro, the Friendship League is never going to end. There's going to be a couple of duos or trios that you're going to see are friends that are you know, comboing up. And some of those will make sense and some of them are not going to make sense, but no, it's always going to be a thing. You're never going to get rid of it. There's going to be a couple of teams and situations that were like, yeah, that is absolute friendship cheese. All right, Maddie Boat. If Falcons were to acquire MC aka Cell or Drazah aka Drazah, who do you think would slide in for the fourth? Cell / Draz, Pred, Exnid, question mark, maybe Craze Nep 04 Real. All right, so you look at that team comp. I'm going to assume MC for this. You had Cell as, you know, your main AR, although he can pull out a sub. Pred would probably run a sub, although I think his best role is on an AR. Exnin, we're not really sure what his best role is. So I think picking up a sub player and then like figuring out a way on who's going to run an AR is probably the best way to do it. I think a run it down sub like a Rail or like a Nep is probably the best path, a Craze. I think 04 would make sense, but like I feel like with this team comp, I don't know if 04 is like the best option. So I think for me, it'd probably be like Nep looking at the list that you provided. All right, we got the guy Matt on Twitter. Is it me or a lot of the current FAs are not IGLs whatsoever? Talent is there, but I think they would benefit greatly from teaming up with the Slashers and Kennys in the league, and not just amongst themselves. Well, I think Austin and Ken are going to definitely factor in, but like you go to this like roster tracker list, like it's a lot of people playing a lot of different roles. And so like, I don't think necessarily like some of these people made, you know, team of 2, team of 3, but a lot of them are going to combo up with people in the situation, like Toronto, for example. Like who would, you know, Joe's got a lot of friends on this list, Abe as well. Do they try and recruit some people over to the situation? Like that's an example where we'll see kind of how people combo up. But to your point about IGLs, is you see with like, say like Optic, it really helps when you have someone kind of human UAV. But that's like a very specialty position. And like, I don't think necessarily every team needs that. Like FaZe and Thieves won 4 events this year. And I don't think they have like one player in particular that's always like a human UAV. I would say DanGhosty maybe a little bit, but not as much as Dan was doing on say Optic in his previous team that he played on. All right, the Baba Yaga. Will Drazah end up on the outside looking in for a champs contender? FaZe is done with him. Optic isn't changing. Beef with Scrap doesn't allow a Thieves reunion. I don't think that's why Thieves want to pick him up. Which leaves Falcons, but they could be targeting other ARs. I think Zach is someone that is going to end up on like that 4th, 5th, or 6th team at the moment. But depending on the comp, they could definitely be a champs contender. Look, nobody thought that Vancouver at the beginning of the year was going to make a win event, let alone compete at an event. So I would stay away from some of these questions. I think Drazah's stock is still pretty good. I would say he could go back to phase. Optic obviously isn't gonna make a change. And Thieves, it will require him and Scrap to sit down, which could definitely happen. But I just don't think that, you know, him for Dan or him for Envoy is the kind of move that they're gonna want to make during this roster period. All right, my guy Binks. What would your ideal roster be of free agents, only free agents currently? So looking at his wrist, I would go probably, I would probably do Neptune 04, maybe Abuza and MC. And MC, we tell brother, pull a sub out and you're running and gunning. I kind of like that comp, but if you don't want MC, you do like MC and Kleenex or Abuza and Kleenex. I think then you would have like a very, very good team. All right, awesome. We've only got a couple of these questions left. Would you rather have a 16-team league with academy teams and challengers, or CWL HCS style bracket play gives advantage to the big teams but gives other teams opportunities? I would rather go with probably the second option. I think the first option, I am not a fan of just keeping the closed system and adding 4 more teams. I don't really think that's going to solve anything. I think we're going to have a lot more dead games that no one's going to watch. Whereas I think with the second thing, when you kind of do like a 12+4 with people kind of feeding in at every event, I think is a good way to like keep things fresh and keep the grinded challengers like a real path to pro going there for people to want to grind towards. All right, we got the last question from Stacks. Do you think a lane league is possible in the coming years? Similar league format as now with 4-5 majors. The qualifiers are held in person and a LAN setup similar to Major 4 in Modern Warfare 3. Yes, I think it will require some economic things to be figured out as far as like, I think the biggest thing is just team travel and accommodations. But if you can figure that part out, you know, I think finding the space to do it is not impossible. And I don't think the cost is as astronomical on that end as you think. Once you kind of really spread it out and advertise it, factor in sponsors and partners that are interested. Yeah, I think it's doable. I don't think it's going to happen like next year. I don't know if it's going to happen the year after that, but it's definitely possible in the coming years. You can kind of answer those key questions about the monetization of how to make it work. So yeah, I think those are a great set of questions. Shout out to everybody that replied to my tweet. I had a real fun time making this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more. We're going to have plenty of Rostermania content in the coming days, so make sure you check that out. As always, guys, we'll see you on the next one.